Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. My topic is the different English variety as listening comprehension test input. Why not? The presentation today will include 5 main parts: introduction, accent and listening comprehension assessment, test authenticity, test fairness, and the implications for English language educators. Let's start with the introduction. Listening comprehension with its complex construct has posed challenges to professionals in the field of English language testing. With the growing role of English as an international language, one of the most critical issues in the inclusion of different English varieties is listening assessment to accurately represent the listening construct in students' target language use domain, which, however, can give a certain group of listeners an unfair advantage due to their familiarity with the accent. Given this dilemma, the aim of the paper is to examine the effects of accent on listening comprehension and provide suggestions on using accented English input in listening test. Part 2, Accent and Listening Comprehension Assessment. Listening comprehension plays an important role in both daily life and classroom communication. In fact, students are expected to spend 42% to 57.5% of their communication time in the classroom on attentive listening. Listening comprehension, therefore, is one of the most fundamental communication skills for students. But it's also an extremely complicated language skill due to its invisible and cognitive nature, making it difficult to describe and assess listening skill. When developing a listening comprehension test, the test designer must consider various influencing factors, ranging from topic familiarity to question format. Prominent among those factors is the input source or the speaker's accent, which is a typical feature of spoken language. As defined by Derving and Munro, the English accent involves how different a speaker's speech is from that of a native variety of English, its salience, and how easy or difficult it is for the listener to understand a speech, its comprehensibility. It includes the differences in pronunciation, such as in vowels and consonant sounds, stress, and intonation. It is also worth noticing that the accent salience does not detect its comprehensibility, meaning non-native speakers who have a different accent from the English native variety are not necessarily less comprehensible than those who have native-like accent. In reality, people in different parts of the world speak English with different accents. If English is considered as a person, it's a person with too many faces. Hence, including only the native English accent as listening assessment input can be problematic, which will be explained further in the following part. Part 3. Test authenticity, a growing need for using different English varieties as listening input. The English language used worldwide, as mentioned above, is not limited to a single variety, which requires the testing practices, especially international English language test, to reflect its diverse language use situation. Research shows that international students who come from non-native English-speaking backgrounds are very likely to encounter different varieties of English during their study at English medium universities. Not only fellow international students, but also teaching assistants, lecturers, and other academic staffs can sound different from the native speech patterns of English language. Thus, all students, regardless of their nationalities, should be able to comprehend the varieties of English that they will be exposed to on campus. Therefore, the ESL listening comprehension tests need to include accented English to reflect the reality of test takers' listening context. Furthermore, international English language tests are now used and accepted in many countries for various screening purposes. The globalized nature of examinees' experiences means that the inclusion of only native English accents in listening comprehension assessment should be re-examined. Nevertheless, most international English language tests only use a native variety of English as listening comprehension input. For instance, the listening assessment of the test of English as a foreign language, TOEFL, use standard North American accent, whereas standard British, Australian, and American accents are used for the International English Language Testing System, IELTS listening test. The exclusion of other dialects of English is related to the issue of test authenticity and the target language use domain, which is defined by Bachman and Palmas as a set of specific language use tasks that the test taker is likely to encounter outside of the test itself, and to which we want our inferences about language ability to generalize. In other words, the more accurate the representation of the target language use domain on the English test is, the more accurate the test score inference made about examinees' language proficiency is. This again suggests that the dialects test takers may encounter in the real world should be added in the test. However, there are increasing concerns relating to test fairness because test takers may have various degrees of familiarity with the specific English variety. 4. Test fairness. Potential bias due to accent familiarity. According to Harding, 2011, test bias exists when test takers of equal ability have unequal opportunities to get the same test scores because of an influencing factor that is irrelevant to the test construct. The major concern regarding the use of non-native speakers' accents as listening assessment input is that some students may receive an unfair advantage due to their familiarity with a particular accent used on the test, while others can be disadvantaged if that accent is unfamiliar to them. Test fairness can only be guaranteed when all test takers have the same degree of familiarity with the chosen English varieties on the test. Hence, it will be a threat to test fairness if a listener performs better or worse than others because of his familiarity or unfamiliarity with the speaker's accent. This familiarity may be associated with the fact that the speakers and the listeners speak the same mother tongue, which is called a shared L1 advantage. Bent and Berthelot suggest that a shared L1 advantage can be justified by the theory of cross-language speech perception about the impacts of one's native language on his second language accent. Listeners who share the same mother tongue as a speaker are likely to be more familiar with the stress patterns, intonation, and other phonological features, so they will find the speaker's speech more comprehensible than speech of other speakers. Moreover, the familiarity may result from previous exposure to the accents, not from the fact that the speakers and listeners share the same L1. Research adopting World English approach reveals that frequent exposure to an accent can also boost the understanding of speakers with the same accent. Another possible explanation for test bias when using non-native English varieties is that the speaker pace of non-native English speakers may be not as fast as that of native speakers, giving the listeners more time to process and understand the input better. A number of studies in the existing literature have been conducted in an attempt to investigate the potential bias created by accented English on listening comprehension tests. Most studies agree that the test taker's familiarity with the accent input can, to some extent, affect the listening test performance. Interestingly, attitudes towards the English varieties used on a test can also affect listening comprehension performance. The more prestige accorded to a language or a dialect, the better the comprehension of it. Or in other words, positive attitudes can boost comprehension when negative attitudes may impede it. Research shows that many ESL learners do not support the use of non-native English varieties as test input. In Gu and So's study 2015, most participants responded positively to the idea of using different native varieties of English in listening tests, but they were against the use of non-native accents. There are two possible explanations for this bias. First of all, there's a long-held belief among students that English language should be evaluated based on the native speaker standards. Secondly, students tend to be more familiar with standard varieties of English, British English, and American English due to their widely available access. Although they may be aware of the need to be exposed to both standard and non-standard varieties of English, test takers still seem to concern more about their test performance, whether they can receive satisfactory scores on a test. Overall, most research findings affirm potential test bias due to accent familiarity, but it does not necessarily exist in all contexts. As suggested by Oki and French, 2016, the inconsistent results in the literature may result from a difference in defining accent, including a particular threshold of familiarity, strength of accent, or a combination of both. Accurate identification of these thresholds can help test developers to solve the dilemma and construct a multi-dialectal multidialectal listening test without hamper test fairness. Five, suggestion for English language educators, teachers, and test developers. Whether to include different varieties of English or not requires careful deliberation from test designers. Harding, 2011, suggests conducting needs analysis as the initial step for test designers to identify the varieties that are relevant to students' language use domain. After that, when designing the test items, test developers need to select a number of highly intelligible non-native speakers of English to ensure fairness. A measure such as the strength of accent scale developed by Oki in French 2016 should be used in the process of selection. This measure can help test designers to include various mild accents without giving any students unfair advantages or disadvantages. Moreover, the scale may bring positive washback, encouraging students to acquire a multi-dialectal listening skill. Hence, more varieties of English accents can be used on the English language test without creating test bias. In the case of high-stakes international English test, the issues still remain because not all English varieties can be included in one single test. So non-native varieties of English should, at this point, be implemented in low-stakes tests such as placement, diagnostic, or achievement test. Most importantly, the introduction of different varieties of English, including both native and non-native, in ESL and EFL teaching will increase students' exposure to a wide range of English accents and correct the bias against non-native English varieties. The use of accented English in language testing can only receive more support from test takers when it gains more recognition from ESL learners and other stakeholders. Conclusion. My presentation investigates the use of various English accents on listening comprehension tests. Using only one English variety is a threat to assessment authenticity since it fails to reflect the target language use domain. Meanwhile, using unmeasured accents as test input can create unfairness. The dilemma can be resolved by the implementation of the strength of accent scale by Oki in French 2016 that can accurately represent the listening comprehension in reality without unfairly disadvantaging any students. Furthermore, introducing different English varieties in the classroom can reduce students' bias against non-native accents and highlight the necessity to develop a multi-dialectal listening ability. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, please contact me. Thank you for listening.